My friend A.W. recently asked me about a verse in Proverbs. It says, "The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it." The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow. That's Proverbs 10:22. And she said, "Gosh, I love this verse, but could you provide a resource or some explanation or some other context for it?" So I just wanted to pick out a handful of other verses from Proverbs 10 and 11, chapters 10 and 11, and just kind of walk through a biblical understanding of what the blessing is and really what causes us to become prosperous. I certainly believe that God wants us to live a prosperous, abundant life. I mean, Jesus said, "I come that they may have life and that more abundantly." And if it's an impoverished, constrained life, that doesn't sound abundant, right? So in any case, let's take a look at Proverbs 10:4. "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." This is one of a series of commentaries that Solomon recorded about don't be poor. Don't be lazy. Don't be slack. You need to work. Blessing comes from work. Blessing comes from providing value. When we put our hands to work, when we dedicate our time and our effort, essentially we're giving our life. In fact, we call it livelihood, don't we? How do you earn your living? When we are engaged in work and providing value to other people, that causes us to prosper, to experience material and financial blessing. But a slack hand causes poverty. It causes poverty. In other words, if we choose not to work, or we're lazy, or we just want to sit back, well, the result of that is not going to be blessing. The opposite of blessing being poverty. Okay, let's slide over to chapter 11. There's 3 verses that are just rich, 11:24 through 26. 24 says, one gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want." I think the summary of this would be that blessing comes from giving. But it's such an interesting observation that Solomon makes here, that one gives freely, yet he grows richer. It seems to make sense that if we wanted to grow richer, we should keep all that we can, to grasp it, to cling on to it, to hold on, to build up our storehouse or our wealth or our brokerage account or our bank account. But there's something that happens when we are open-handed, when we give freely, grows all the richer. But another one withholds what he should give. This is a stingy person. They're tight with their money. They're kind of greedy, selfish. This is mine and I'm hanging on to it. And that one suffers want. He's lacking. He thinks he's going to do better by hanging on to his own and not giving. But he actually experiences lack. The next verse is 25, Proverbs 11:25. "Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered." Blessing comes from giving. This is a further explanation of verse 24, and it reminds me of Jesus' description of value creation. This is in Luke 6:38. Jesus says, "Give, and it shall be given to you." There's this reciprocity that happens, a sowing and reaping. When we give, we schedule a harvest to come back into our lives. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters gives people what they need, gives plants what they need, provides nourishment, sustenance, support, care, help, will himself be watered, receive care, nourishment, sustenance, help, support. When we give, we are enabled and positioned to receive. And then the last verse is Proverbs 11:26. "The people curse him who holds back grain, but a blessing is on the head of him who sells it." Who sells it? Blessing comes from doing good business, from finding what people need, what they want, and then providing it at a fair price. Blessing comes from doing good business. All right, so let's put all these verses together. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. You've probably heard stories of professional athletes who suddenly come into great wealth because of a contract, and then after they retire, they live in poverty. You may have heard of people who win the lottery, but their kids end up in drug abuse and they're impoverished. They squander their money. That's because they get the money, but they don't actually have the blessing. Because the blessing comes from work, from doing good business, and from giving. That's where the blessing comes from. So the blessing of the Lord makes rich, but he doesn't add the sorrow that comes when we get money the wrong way, without being prepared for it, without having the muscles of giving, work, diligence, and doing good business. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow.